Reactive training systems.
Well, like you would just tell me your alarm and like how you've got this alarm that wakes you up gently with like a gradually brightening
Yeah.
light. And then if it gets to the point that it's fully bright, then there's like some softer sounds, birds
Yeah.
chirping, something like that. It wakes you up. You get up on time, but it wakes you up gently.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's so funny to contrast that with like my approach, which my alarm is like I set it for a time and it will start making whatever noise, which thankfully I'm not one of these people that needs like the klaxon or anything,
Right.
But it starts making noise. But to turn it off, I've got it set up so that I have to get up and go to the bathroom and like scan a barcode that I've got in the bathroom. And that's enough to like get me up and I'm not, going back to sleep after that. Anyway, I thought that was interesting because like we talk about how you and I end up at such similar conclusions, but just get there through different
Yeah.
means.
Very, very different means. That it was interesting. Vanessa found this. I don't even remember what it's called, to be completely honest with you, but she found it as a Kickstarter and made a donation to this Kickstarter. And it took like, I don't know, I think like a year for her to actually get it. And
Yeah.
it's awesome. Like there's some funky operations about it. When the light's turning on, it's to turn it off, it has to come fully bright before you can turn it off. So that's kind of weird. But I'm really enjoying the gentle wake up. And I think about a lot of conversations that we've had before and how I mentioned, when I started coaching for you full time and I started just waking up because I wanted to go to work and I no longer hit the snooze button or anything like that. Like this thing wouldn't have worked back then at that point in my life. It wouldn't have woke me up. I would have just unplugged it or some shit because I didn't want to get up. But now like it goes off. And like I said, if you set your alarm for 6:30, the light portion starts slowly brightening for like 30 minutes. So I'm usually up like 15 minutes before my actual need to wake up time. And I'm not like, oh, I woke up early. Oh no, I missed out on sleep. I'm just like, oh, it's time to wake up. It's just really peaceful.
Oh, that definitely sounds more pleasant, less jarring. I had a guy on my academy powerlifting team back when I was in school, and we would have our powerlifting practices or whatever at like 5 o'clock in the
Mm-hmm.
morning when the gym opened, because that's the only time that we could all ensure that we got together. Because we'd be back in our rooms by breakfast for a breakfast formation. So that was the time. And it sucked for everybody. But I had this one kid who was a freshman on the team and was just like consistently missing practices. And, I went to him one day and I was like, hey, man, look, our practice is at 5 a.m. I know that sucks, but this is a practice time. Try to make it practice. And he's like, I'm trying, but you don't understand. I set my alarm, and when I wake up in the morning, it's late. I'm already late for the breakfast formation. I've totally missed practice and everything. And my alarm is off, it's unplugged and locked in my security drawer. I have no idea how it happened.
Oh man.
I was like, okay, dude, cool. Try to get to practice. All right, I got other things to deal with. I don't know. It turned out that guy had brain parasites.
Whoa.
Yeah, he had something going on. He had picked it up someplace, and he had like all kinds of odd behaviors, but he was like unplugging his alarm clock and locking it in his security drawer and had no memory
Wild.
or anything like
Can you was he able to treat that and get rid of it?
that. As far as I know, I mean, I kind of lost touch with him after I left school,
Gotcha.
but it was
Yeah, I
wild.
was gonna say that sounds like it would be pretty impactful to living life in not a good way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that raises a bunch of questions, right? Beyond the scope of a powerlifting podcast, but like, are are you responsible for the BS that you pull? Like it wasn't me; it was my brain parasites.
Yeah. Oh, it's my brain parasites. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Anyway, deep ethics questions aside, maybe we should kind of come back to powerlifting a little bit. I wanted to kind of touch base, circle the wagons, whatever metaphor you want to put in here, have a conversation with you after, you had such a really successful year. Like your year in powerlifting this year has been phenomenal. And kind of the capstone on all of that is a successful run at the World Championships this year, where you won first place at the M183 class. You had a PR total, lifetime personal best total at the World Championships to win your weight class, become a world champ, and also become best lifter of the competition, beating out a lot of stiff competition. No slouches. The Masters Worlds this year.
No.
So that's a hell of a capstone on a successful year. And I mean, you and I have known each other a long time, and we've kind of followed along your arc this year. We did a podcast earlier this year about a lot of the lessons that you've learned along the way, kind of compare and contrast our approaches, because you and I have both kind of overcome some injury issues, derailing us pretty bad. I guess let me turn it over to you a little bit, and maybe we should start by talking about the lead up to competition. What is training like for you? When does like the mentality shift and you start thinking, okay, this is the prep, this is where I'm getting ready for world?
Well, I suppose if you were to look at it from a programming basis, I've been able to stumble along to or arrive at a 3-block sequence that I feel works pretty well. I ran it. I ran it going into nationals with a twist, and then based on what I learned about it going into nationals, tweaked it a little bit going into worlds. So I suppose at the start of that first block, that's kind of the start of the shift. But in all honesty, like I've grown to a place where I'm pretty consistent, and I don't necessarily go into training and be like, oh, this is for worlds. Let's fucking go. Because for
Right.
me, when I allow myself to get too like excited like that, that excitement starts to drive my decision making, and that usually leads to overreaching and more fatigue and not a productive and responsive training. So I really try and not necessarily deny the emotions that might come up in terms of like, oh wow, I get to go to worlds or something like that, but more be more aware of it and kind of like have a moment with it, but not like use it like how a lot of people use that for motivation and things of that nature. If I use that for motivation to train and train harder, it will I'll train too hard. And so learning where that I suppose tipping point is for myself has been really beneficial. And in all honesty, like it's still like an ongoing thing. Like I have to manage it all the time. Like it's not one of those things that like, oh, here's the line, just don't cross it. No, here's the line. You have to constantly actively not cross it. And like it shows up a lot, like especially in training leading to worlds, because I was hitting lots of PRs. And there was one point where I was starting to get just a little bit too aggressive, and I had to pull back a little bit. And there's times and cues and signs from my body physically that will remind me of that, and I have to be really respectful of those. And when I am, it usually has a pretty positive outcome and heads in the right direction. But if I'm not, well, then I fall back into some of those old patterns and habits and behaviors and just try and power through everything.
So what kinds of things do you look for would signal to you that maybe you're letting things go too hot?
Obviously, there's going to be like some of the physical signs in terms of like being aware of your fatigue level, and if you're starting to get some aches and pains that are coming on, they're not necessarily, I wouldn't categorize them as injuries, but they're not necessarily part of your baseline. And so just being aware of like where that baseline is and allowing that to remind you to take a little off the top. You don't have to stop training. You don't have to drop a bunch of training, but you just have to be like, oh, okay, today's not a day for aggression. Even if I feel good, today is not a day for aggression, just because it's building. The pressure's building.
That's a hard thing to do in practice. I would say it's a mature attitude, but it's like it's more than that. It's just
It
hard,
is.
because you've kind of got the situation where you want to push things, you want to allow things to develop, and just to demonstrate strength as well, but then to actively make that choice and say, nah, I'm not, I'm going to be intentionally a little more conservative, even though I could push it today. Because, you know, when I got out of bed this morning, my knee was achy, and yeah, it went away, but, you know, still, like, let's not completely ignore
Right.
this.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should, or that it's the right decision. And that can be
Yeah.
like, that's really hard. We look at our training with RPE, and we're auto regulating our training. We're auto regulating load via the use of the RPE tool. And I think in large part, probably every one of us that uses RPE is guilty of it at some point or another, of strictly using it to add more weight. And we get lost in wanting to use it to add more weight rather than using it also for a tool of creating sustainability through intentional, like holding back just a little bit. And I look at that, I try to ask myself, like, is what I'm doing right now going to be sustainable? Can I keep up at this pace, or do I need to slow it down just a little bit, because that creates sustainability? And that can be really important.
Well, it's hard to decouple there's so much emotion that gets tied up into just how your training is going, you know, and that's not a bad thing necessarily either. Like, it's something that you care about. Of course, you care and feel something when it's going well and when it's going poorly, but RPE and the decisions that you make in training, as much as possible, ought to be, based on putting you in a better position, improving your position over time,
Yeah.
not just giving your ego a hug today.
Yeah.
That, and I mean, that comes in a lot of forms too, right? Like, I've had people who, they get a little beat up and something is achy or something like that, and they just say, F it, I'm going home. When that's not really the right decision to make. Like, maybe there's something we could have done to salvage this. And then there's the other situation too. You're feeling good, and even though you shouldn't, for whatever reason, you throw an extra 5 or 10 kilos on the bar, and now we've got other problems to deal with. So it so much comes back to good decision making, and that just being a thing that's hard to do when you're talking about doing it consistently for a long time.
Yeah. I was chatting with Adam Jones a little bit the other day, and him and I were having some exchanges about lifting in life. And, he tweaked his back the other day, and it was a pretty good little tweak. I had him laid up for a minute, and he was telling me about, being pissed off about it, and not because it derails training, but because it derails life. And, he couldn't go pick up the kids from school because he was in a bit of pain, and he had to have Erica, his wife, do it. And some other things that it was being impactful for. And like, that's critical. Like, that's one of the things I tell him was in the response was, cool, be pissed off, feel every bit of that, and use that emotion to cultivate change in your decision making when you're lifting. And think along the way, when we're in moments like that of like, how does this choice in my training right now impact my life? Because I like being injured sucks from a lifting standpoint, but it sucks more when you can't live life. We're not,
Yeah, yeah,
it's a
totally.
hobby, a sport. We're not out there fighting for multi-million-dollar contracts. Like it, so if it's not, to me, if it's not adding value to my life and not allowing me to live my life in a high quality way, then the price isn't worth it. The cost is not worth it.
Yeah. Well, and kind of speaking of a little bit, like you had some setbacks in your run up to Worlds this year.
Yeah.
Right? You had a back injury, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Was that the main one?
The first block, I tweaked my SI joint. And I don't know why. Sometimes, I know a lot of times we want to try and figure out, well, why did this happen so that it doesn't happen again? And well, there's a lot of times we just don't freaking know, and we can't create paralysis by analysis in that way. Like the SI joint tweak in the first block, I was starting out great. I felt real good. And it was week 1, day 2 of my deadlift. I had a great top set. I had some low RP volume back off work, and it was my very last set, my very last rep. And I went to go pull. And I mean, I was doing sets of 6 at 60%. So it was real low key. And man, something shifted in my left SI joint and it hurt. And I didn't lift like competition exercises on week 2. Week 3, I was finally able to start to move them again. And then weeks 4 and 5 were up. So I was actually able to have a rate of gain across the block. And then in the peaking block, week 3 of the peaking block, a 5-week time to peak, week 3, day 3, my SBD, SDE day, squats with bands. I forget which bench I had, and nightmare deadlifts. And again, I had been feeling really, really good and PR'd my squat with band. Felt like I was about to potentially PR my nightmare deadlift, and set 1 by 2 at 7. Second rep, I just got out of position. It kind of, I rushed a little bit and bounced off the floor just a little bit, just enough to kind of get me out of position and strained my low back just a little bit. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not so bad. It things happen. It's not ideal timing. I I know that motion is lotion. I have to just keep moving. I don't necessarily have to keep loading things up, but I need to move. My peak might be a little bit not where it was looking, but I know I have my baseline strength is real high right now, and I can rely on that. So we're good. Just in both times, it was really, I suppose, interesting because it was the first time that I got injured in prep where I didn't go, oh shit, no, not this again. It was just, okay, what can I do? And that was like a really cool moment to get to that point of like, oh wow, I'm not panicking. I'm just focusing forward. And I truly believe that getting to that mindset shift was a big part in getting recovered as quickly as I did and being able to still perform in the way I did, because I didn't allow myself to have such a hard negative stress response. If we talk about stress adaptation, well, if I get hurt and then I go, bro, no, I don't want this. Well, that's increasing the stress response of the body. Whereas if I go, okay, what can I do now? I am stopping no longer contributing to the addition of stress in that moment. I stop the flow. Okay, cut it off. Cool. I mean, again, it's not the thing that anybody wants. It's not the thing that's exciting and fun, but it doesn't matter. That's the situation you're in right now. What are you going to do? As they say, life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to it.
So what got you to that point? How did you get to the point where, you could have something like this happen that's, obviously this big setback for this thing that you've been building up to for years now, but you're able to handle it in stride without, frankly, a strong negative emotional response.
Devaluing the outcome. Outcome is just a data point to inform you of the next choice and the next thing to do. For so long, for so many years, with a lot of the mental health journey and stuff that I've shared with you before and have shared with many people, in its earlier stage, like it saved my life in high school. And then it became something that gave me recognition. It gave me some like form of validation from my peers. And I just didn't realize how stuck and entrenched I got in that, in like needing the validation from other people. And you get validation when you win and you do good. And so, oh, yay, that feels good. And not that that is wrong, but if that is your sole source, you're going to have a bad time at whatever it is that you're doing. So learning to fully get away from that, I need to do good so that people give me the attaboys and then I'm good, and that validates all my effort and input. Getting away from that is the key. Like, is winning more fun than losing? Sure, it is. But at the same time, like, if there's more people that don't win than win. Does that mean that they're all bad lifters and they should stop lifting? Absolutely not. So why would it matter for me? And like, it was a surreal experience. One of the first ones, if I think back to like the Abs Pro in 2021, I think it was. And it was arguably the worst powerlifting meet of my entire career. I almost bombed on bench press. I missed my opener and my second because I couldn't keep my butt down. I went 5 for 9. It was atrocious from a performance and output standpoint. And it was a really neat experience for me because I get done and I was intact as a person. Prior to that, I probably would have had a much harder time. I would have been a lot grumpier. It would have taken me a lot longer to process through that. But it was like, oh, well, it is what it is. My performance isn't acceptable and I'm okay. I can learn from this and I can move forward. And then to win this time at such a high level and to have such a similar experience, well, it was only a more positive one where I win. I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. Next. Because like, I'm not done yet. I'm not lifting because I want to win. Is winning fun? Yes, but that's not the thing that drives the reason why I lift.
Is this something that you've like done specifically to kind of cultivate this changed attitude? Or is this, do you chalk a lot of this up to maturity? You've done a lot of competitions and, just in your core at this level of experience that some are going to go well, some are not. And that's just how it goes.
It's definitely cultivated very, very intentionally. Like there's stuff that I'm doing all the time that's with the lifting and the training that I do to, in my opinion, enhance the training, enhance the productivity of the training, while also the training supporting what I'm doing in other areas of life. So that the way I've grown to look at this is if lifting isn't making my life better, then I need to shift my focus and that energy and that time spent on lifting to something that will. And for me, like that's lifting, that's the training process. That's part of training is what am I doing in that session that benefits and aids the development of me in a total like athlete and person. I can beat in powerlifting because the training that I like to do, the style of training that I like to do just happens to align well with the sport of powerlifting. But like I've said it before, and I'll say it again, if the sport of powerlifting went away today and there was no powerlifting meet from any federation ever again in the history of the world, I really don't know that my training would change a whole lot. I'm certainly not going to start doing burpees and go be a CrossFitter. Like, good for them. I'm glad that they do that. I think the commonality there is, we all refuse to wither away on the couch, and that's important, but burpees aren't for me.
And so, what kinds of things do you do to cultivate it? I'm not sure if this is taking us too far into the weeds, but just if I'm trying to kind of put myself in the shoes of like someone trying to learn something from this conversation as well, like what can I do differently that's going to help me, make some of these changes and become a little less tossed about by circumstance.
Mark planted this seed in me. I think that was 2019, Arnold, something like that. We were all at the Arnold. We were in that Airbnb that one year, and you all allowed me to practice one of the motivational speeches that I had been working on. And I'd made the comment to Mark, like, sometimes I feel, I guess, a bit of guilt that I've gotten to this point. And in a sense, I'm like, what did lifting do for me all those years if all I did was use it to avoid some of my own internal dramas? And he's like, oh, no, man, you can't look at it like that. Lifting taught you the discipline that you needed so that you can continue applying that discipline to your mental health and well-being now. And that was a big seed. That was a real big seed, because the idea now is when you are reflecting on your training, you get more out of it if you're not just thinking about like, oh, well, how'd my squat go and what can I do to improve my squat? And we ask ourselves some other questions on what skills am I learning from this session right now? And how can I apply those skills to other areas of my life? It's all skill development. And if we look at it from that lens, we'll gain more from it. And that's how the lifting will support your life. One, like a low-hanging fruit idea that always comes up for me on this one is the ability to stand in discomfort. Like, none of this we do is comfortable. It's not comfortable to walk out a heavy squat. It's not comfortable to deadlift PR. Like, we have to embrace that discomfort to be able to do it. Oh, well, if I can embrace discomfort here, where else can I embrace discomfort? And like connecting those ideas was one of the biggest things that really helped me improve with my public speaking. I'm like, oh, well, I'm uncomfortable and I can talk and speak and articulate my ideas clearly in the state of that discomfort. If I can squat and move through things when I'm in that state of discomfort, why can't I speak while also being in a state of discomfort? And then when you connect some of those dots and some of those ideas, it's not that it ever removes the discomfort, but your ability to be in the discomfort and it not cause you to waver or cause you to falter is better.
Yes. This connects to me with like this idea you hear, I guess mostly old heads talk about, like, what does lifting do for you? Does it teach you discipline? Does it teach you strength? And does that apply outside of the sport? And I mean, I think it can if you allow it to, if you, or maybe better said, if you intentionally try to cultivate that, but if you just are sitting back and just doing the thing without any of that intentionality, then maybe not. So, I mean, it's not anything particular to lifting, I don't think either. Uh, Although maybe the specific lessons drawn from it might be a little different versus some other discipline, let's say martial arts or something like that, right? but it's like a prolonged, specific effort toward a goal, and that there are things there, character that could be built there, that can be then extracted and applied in other places if you only are willing to look for it and make an effort.
Yeah, for sure. I look at all this stuff too is you see people that kind of come and go in the sport and they're not able to stay and hang for the long term. And there's a couple of reasons why that would occur. One, sometimes people do just need to change direction and effort in their life and need to focus on something else and not powerlifting. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's really important to be able to discern when you're at that point. And the other part of that is in my opinion, if you're pursuing the sport strictly for clout and glory and winning and being stronger than other people, you're going to burn out pretty quick. You're going to have a hard time because not everybody can be at that level. Not everybody, even if you are talented enough to be at that level, we can see very clearly that it's not always sustainable because of the growth of the sport is, we thought it was fast paced a couple years ago. It doesn't seem to have been slowed down at all. It just keeps going. Like the ceiling keeps getting pushed higher and higher and higher across the board. It's wild. So
Definitely seen some people who exhibit that kind of attitude, and it's fine. Like people can change over time too, and I probably had attitudes, or definitely did have attitudes as a young man, that were not sustainable, and fortunately was able to learn from those and grow and change. But better to do that sooner than
right.
later. Why don't I take us back to competition period a little bit? You mentioned as well, like you tore your hand
Oh yeah.
as well. That was pretty
Yeah.
close.
So 1
Pretty
week out.
close to the event itself.
Exactly 1 week out.
So like as you're getting ready to travel pro.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those ones on my hand where the with the shape of my hand and the way my hand tears is if the callus gets too big, it creates a fold underneath the bar and then a gap and it wants to lay flat, so it'll like pull the skin. And the way it tore is it just delaminated the skin a little bit. It didn't like rip it open. So like, the top couple of layers of skin were just connected around the outside of a circle that underneath the circle was delaminated from the other layers of skin. I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. Hopefully that holds up, and so that was Tuesday, 1 week out from the actual meet. And then on Friday, when I'm over there and I'm going to do my last session, I'm just doing, I forget what all I did, but I was just going to do deadlift warm-ups was for my deadlift. And it felt fine. It felt like it was going to be fine. Everything was fine. And then, of course, it always happens on the last one. But the last warm-up, I felt it go a little bit more. And I'm like, oh, shit. I had to cut it off. I had to cut it off today and let it dry out and hope for the best. So I did that. And then we got delayed 3 hours. And so during that 3 hours, I kept putting layer and layer and layer of liquid skin over the tear. I'm like, okay, yeah, this'll hold up. The more I put on there, the better, right? But then as soon as I start lifting and moving and using my hand, you can see that stuff starting to delaminate a little bit. And I'm like, I don't know if that's going to hold. Sure enough, first time I go to put my wrist or where I forget exactly where I was at the chalk bowl or something for my opening deadlift attempt, and I look down and it's like not even on my hand. And I'm like, well, all right. I mean, it is what it is. I can't do anything now. I might have to grit through some pain. Peter knew about it and he's like, yeah, grit for glory, man. Let's go. So fortunately, it didn't like impact anything. It was just enough to make me nervous about whether it was going to impact me or not, but it held up fine. There was a little bit of discomfort, like because the skin in that spot was a little tender, so you could feel it in that regard. But in terms of like it tearing worse, it was intact the whole time. Fortunately, just packed as much chalk in there as possible, and was trying to tell myself like, hey, if it tears, you just got to channel your inner LS, because I'll never forget that year in Denver when he tore his hand open on his second and blood is just streaming down his hand, and he missed it, and he's just packed it fuller and fuller of chalk for his third and goes out and makes it on his third. And I'm like, man, beautiful, dude. Beautiful.
That's a kind of grit that I'm not sure I've got. Like you could just do volume deadlift work, and at some point your hands start to get, kind of beat up and raw.
Yeah.
And it's enough to start making a difference in force production and
yeah
else. It's I don't know, I guess it's different, like doing it in a competition setting versus, just a training environment.
Yeah.
But
well, and
I
look at that one too, is like that's a risk to reward ratio. That load it up, let's go. Tore hand, I'm going through it. Now if it's a tweaked erector or something like that, nah, I'm good. And so like that whole week with having kind of tweaked it back a little bit, and that week of I was feeling fine. I knew again I wasn't going to be able to be as aggressive as I was thinking weeks prior. And this is that managing that excitement, because I forget exactly what the world record total is. I think it's like 778, something around there. And, prior to even starting the training cycle, like I'm aware of what those numbers are at, and I'm like, that's a stretch. That's a stretch. I'm not gonna try and get after that. And training started going so well, and I'm like, ooh, that is now on the table. That's right. That's right fucking there. I could, if I have a good day, that's right there. Oh man. All right. Let's go. And as soon as that tweak happened, I'm like, okay, I got to reprioritize. I got to let go of that. I can't have that. That is clearly a distraction right now. Let it go. And so I knew I had to let that go.
I like that framing. Let me just linger on that for a second, because that's really good framing to take something that looks like an opportunity that's just on the cusp of being possible and label it as a distraction. That's really useful. And, I mean, there's a lot of times when the temptation is like, well, let me just keep the option open, yeah, it's right on the limit. Yeah, and maybe you have a more mature outlook on training. Like you get a lot of people who, as they prepare for a competition, or thinking about, like, they get really fixated on, if I have a perfect day.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit later in your career you realize that those perfect days are rare. You shouldn't spend too much time thinking about them. But it's still like, it's still tempting to just want to keep the option open, but to say actively, like, no, that's a distraction. Keeping that option open means being more aggressive in my other attempts. It means I need to take a big jump, maybe a little heavier opener, and things like that. And the risk there is that you miss.
Yeah.
And miss, I mean, and by now we all know, like, missed lifts are really costly when it comes to a total and things like that. So just from a perspective of playing the game properly, being able to look at some of those and be like, yeah, okay, that's a perfect day total or something like that. Okay, yeah, maybe, but let's not spend a lot of time focusing on perfect day objectives.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep, for sure.
Hey, if Ronnie Coleman was a powerlifting coach, he might have said, everybody wants to build custom training programs, but nobody's got a process for how to do it on the regular. But we do. You see, most coaches rely on trial and error, and that's fine if that's your jam, but we wanted a coherent process. Way back in 2015, when I'd already been coaching for over a decade, I finally had learned enough from enough sources that I was able to put the pieces together into one coherent process. We call it emerging strategies. The bulk of our 16 world record setting powerlifters set those records using an emerging strategies program. We talk about emerging strategies a ton on this podcast and everywhere. If you ever want a single thorough explanation for how to implement the emerging strategies process, well, that's the emerging strategies course. The emerging strategies course includes 8 modules. That's almost 24 hours of video instruction covering everything. We teach fundamental concepts and basics all the way through integrated examples and case studies. You can watch it at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you want. Oh, and you know the RTS community, our private community that offers you just a stupendous amount of value all on its own? Well, if you enroll in the Emerging Strategies course, you get 6 months of that community membership for free. If you have any questions about some concept, you just post it in the network or jump on a live office hour call with one of our RTS coaches, and you get your answer. If you'd like to enroll or just learn more, to include seeing a full lesson list, all you have to do is go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on courses in the main menu. You're going to love it.
For sure.
So, sorry, you were going to say something.
If I'm perfectly honest, I do, when I reflect on it, I allowed that distraction, I allowed that excitement of like going for that. I think it did dial up my aggression just a little bit too much. And that's how I look at like that bit of that back tweak was my body going, hey, slow down. You are on an unsustainable pace. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I hear you. I'm going to
Yeah.
respect you. I'm going to respect that. Demonstrate the self-respect and control.
In training decision making. Yeah. In training decision making is just, it's hard to get it right. It's hard to know that you're getting it right. I mean, like, anybody can do a session for a week, but it's like week in, week out for months, making good choices and being aggressive enough, but not too aggressive. That's
right.
I think that's the part of powerlifting training that's hard.
I mean, there's so much that gets rooted into the culture of our training in this sport that is, the way I look at it, the 2 biggest tripping stones is this idea of more work equals more gains. We know that's not true, but yet we still seem to fight that animal a lot of times as coaches and sometimes as lifters. And then the other one being, I have to follow the program strictly to a T. Like I have to do, it's written that I do 4 sets. I got to do 4 sets. It's written that I do 6 sets. I got to do all 6 sets. And, that's part of the equation that you and I've been playing around with on our different ways.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I've been talking about it with lifters that are like, oh, sorry, coach, I couldn't get all the work in because of ABC. I'm like, hey, no, you don't have to apologize to me about that. Don't ever think that you owe me an apology because you didn't get the work written. The way to think about this is this program was written under the premise that your normal baseline, call them perfect conditions, exist. They don't exist every day for a fucking long laundry list of reasons. Not all of them are from training either. A lot of the life impacts are going to be real. Whether it be lack of sleep or a high workload volume, all kinds of different things. And those impact the conditions. Those impact they're a variable in the equation that we can't account for when we're writing the training.
Yeah. Totally. So let's come back to the competition here. So you travel down there, you get through that last week, the taper, and it's comp day. You show up, you get weighed in. You guys had some pretty extensive
Yeah.
delays, right?
Yep. 3 hours.
So, well, I guess you mentioned that also when you were talking about coating your callus and new skin. How did that affect you?
It didn't. I mean, I shouldn't say it didn't. It was definitely pushing an old man's bedtime, when it comes to deadlift. But it didn't feel too impactful, in all honesty. I definitely wanted to get going and start and lift, and I'm here. It's like let's go. But what was really interesting for me is there's a lot of people that were complaining and bitching about it, and I mean, rightfully so. There should not be a 3-hour delay at a world championship. That's poor execution. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, here we are. It's outside of my control. As Matt Gary says, focus on the things that you can control. Everything else is trivial. And just had to remind myself of that in that moment. Like, hey, I can't change the timing of the meet. I can't none of that stuff. So what can I do? Remind myself of that theme that's been supporting me through this training right now. Anytime I'd get that tweak, okay, what can I do right now? What can I do? I'm like, oh, well, I have 3 more hours now to mentally prepare for my execution. So I did a lot of meditation and visualization during that time and was, super calm and centered and grounded the entire time. As soon as I reminded myself this is what I need to do at this time in this space, is not worry about, oh, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. No, don't waste your energy like that. Do the thing that that supports you and your lifting, and just chill, relax, meditate, visualize how you visualize the execution that you want to create.
So then you finally do get to the point where you can start lifting.
Mm-hmm.
How did squats play out for
Pretty good, 'cause I got golden squat.
you?
But it was feeling good. That was definitely like, how are things going to feel once you get past it by 1 at 8? I don't know. Let's find out. That's what we're here for. Um,
Had squats been bugging you, like in terms of like your back or anything like that in the lead up, or squats were pretty good to go?
Squats were going really good in training. That's the weird part about the SI joint tweak early on and the back tweak closer, is that I tweaked them both during a deadlift variation, but following that, deadlift was intact and I felt it squatting. And it took a little bit more care and caution to squat than to deadlift. So that was kind of weird, but whatever. Opener goes good, second goes good, come off the platform, and Peter and I were chatting. It's like, what do we know is there? Originally the game plan was to go to 275, and I think it was 260 on my second. Moved really well. And 275 was completely reasonable. But it was also a matter of like, with where Canada was opening and where he typically goes in his spreads, Peter, with his scouting report, was amazing. It's like, oh, no, just 270's there. 275 may or may not be there. Just stay with 270. And it took that, and it moved really well. And Steve from Canada missed his third, so that put me in a bit more of a driver's seat. And then we were blowing and going from there.
Yeah, so you made 3 squats, took the sure thing
Yep.
to build that total.
Yep.
Then you move on to the bench. And
Same thing. Really?
yeah, bench hadn't really been giving you any trouble during this prep either.
Yeah. I wasn't able to go too terribly hard in bench prep. Just there's some weird, it's like a rear delt naggy thing that just wasn't kind of resolving. And I was finally starting to actually get it resolved the final couple of weeks going into the meet. So that was nice. But I definitely didn't have quite the bench momentum that would have, been ideal. But again, I wasn't like upset about it. It just I wasn't going as hard on it as maybe what I would like to.
But you're able to take what was there and build a total. So then you roll into deadlift, and how are you feeling kind of at the start of deadlift?
Good, in control, in very much control, both of myself and the meet itself, like in terms of building the total and where that was looking. And like Peter again had a scouting report, and he comes over to me and he's like, hey, based on this, if we take 282.5 on a second, that makes him have to pull, I forget what exactly it was, a PR, and then you still have your third to go to add to that. So right away we adjusted the game plan back down a little bit. The original plan, I was really hoping to call for 300 for the first time. That would have been cool. It would have been silly in that situation, I think, to go for it, because if I would have put 300 on the bar on the third and missed, it would have opened the door big time for him, because he had to pull 312.5 to try and pull for the pull for the total tie and win on body weight based on the 290 that I pulled on my third. And had I not done that, then he would have only had to do 302.5, I think, if I would have missed my third. And I think he would have had it. Just 312.5, moved pretty quick off the floor, and then slipped his grip right at his knees. Well, when it came off the floor the way it did, I was like, oh, shit. But here we are.
Sinky for a second.
Yeah.
Were you thinking about best lifter thing like that during this time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was. Like I knew what the landscape was, and I knew that was all a possibility, but at the same time, a conversation with Peter, it's a matter of like, you have to prioritize the goals. You have to prioritize what you're trying to do. And the priority for me was the 83 championship. So anything else on top of that's just a bonus. What do we got to do to try and get a win here? And so that drove everything. I had more in the squat. I had maybe a little more in bench press, and I had more in deadlift. I didn't have to go to a full 10 on those lifts. So, I didn't necessarily maximize the total. There could have been more on there. Whatever. I didn't know, though, that what was going to happen in LS's 105 session with Anthony McLegan out of Ireland. LS misses his second deadlift. Anthony takes his jump up to his third. That would have put him as best lifter. And we're talking with LS because him and Anthony are real close. And I'm like, man, LS missed his second at 300. I was hoping he was going to make it, and we'd go 315, and crunching the numbers in the back, I'm like, look, we can go up to 307.5, and that'll put you in the lead by 2.5 kilos. He'll drop down. He'll most likely get it. He's got 2.5 more. There is a chance that he makes a mistake, an error, and misses, and you win. It's unlikely. And mind you, Anthony's got a really hard deadlift to read if you know nothing about the guy, which I know nothing about the guy other than, I met him on that trip. And because he's got like that roll the bar out in front of you and roll it back in, and very much like a crane type deadlift where there's a lot of rounded back. And I'm like, man, I have no idea how much this guy has left in him. Like those deadlifters, sometimes they can just keep going and going and going. And it's like, I have no idea, And so we figured that LS anyway needed 307.5. And so we put it on the board. And he goes out and he pulls it like a second. It's like, man, why couldn't you just do that the first time? He's like, oh, I'm sorry, man. I'm like, yeah, oh well. So Anthony dropped back down as predicted to pull for the win of the 93s, but he had to give up best lifter. So that was kind of fun. And the Ireland coach is coming over and he's like, oh, you did that just so we wouldn't come take your best lifter. I'm like, oh, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's good when teammates were able to provide cover.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I was told LS, thanks for looking out and helping me out, man. I won't make you do that deadlift volume session now.
right.
So that was all good fun.
So after you finish, you know, you pull your last deadlift, you've won, and I guess at that point you're in first place as best lifter, but the competition's not over yet. How do you feel at that point?
Oh, I feel good. You know, like it was kind of one of those things. Like, wow, I've had my eyes on that for so many years now. You know, like 2012 was my first nationals, and I placed sixth. And I have these ideas and goals to climb the ranks, and you know, I don't know where it's going to go, but my goal was to get into the top 5. And I couldn't, my rate of gain couldn't keep up with the sports rate of gain, you know, and it gets to this point where it's like, it's just the sport's going bonkers because that in 2012, Alex Stratisky was the only 83 that was totaling over 700 kilos, the only one. And now 700 kilos isn't even going to get you into the top 50. Like, so it's just bonkers to think about that. And you know, I knew I'm an aging athlete. We all get older, and I started looking. I'm like, well, Masters is just around the corner. I can get away from all these freaking kids, man. Because it seemed like as well, like the Open was getting dominated by juniors and people that are just out of the juniors. It's like, man, 23-year-olds these days are real strong. Holy shit! So, you know, I'd been eyeballing Masters for a hot minute, and you know, the whole time I'm like, you know, I'm not going to get attached to this because, you know, I never know who's going to show up. I never know who's going to age in. I have no idea, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm going to do the best I can. And, you know, that's my target. That's my aiming point of where I'll direct my efforts. So it felt good for that to like finally come to fruition, but it was also surreal in the way that it was like standing on the platform or standing on the podium with the win and hearing the national anthem and looking down and seeing Vanessa and Rosalie there with me. And it's like, whoa, it happened. This is really cool. Okay, next. Like almost as fast as I got off the platform, it was just like, okay, here we go. Next. You know, and it's like, for me, that was the moment of my own validation of the work that I'd been doing for myself of I don't need that to justify anything I'm doing. And just because I did that and I checked off that accomplishment and that goal that I was working on, I ain't done yet. Because there is so much more value that I gain from just the whole process of how I train than winning any meet. And there's just no, it's like that satisfaction, you're happy and proud of it, but it's not ever going to allow for complacency.
And that's not the central
Right.
motivator. You know, that it's interesting because like as I listen to what you're saying here, I know that one of my central motivators is setting PRs, and I know that, you know, someday that comes to an end. We've talked about this
Mm-hmm.
before, but you know, for now, that's where that does mean something to me. It means a lot
it's
to me.
and that's
Yeah.
it still does mean something to me as well. Like I very much have
Yeah,
numbers
yeah.
in mind. I very much want to attack that world record total, the world record squat. Deadlift might be a little bit out of reach, you know, at 325, I think it is. We'll see.
But I'm thinking just like as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, you know, you said that's not the reason. Like that's cool. That's a goal, but that's not the goal,
Hmm.
right? And and the words that come to my head are like, well, of course, you just set a PR total. Like, of course you're not done yet, right? And you know, then I'm realizing like, oh, well, that's another that's a projection of a different goal, you know, that and I know this is something I do quite a bit. This is something probably to be worked on is just kind of assuming that goal exists for
Mm.
people. I mean, for powerlifters, probably,
Yeah.
you know, setting PRs with the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's safe. Like when you're talking to people outside of this, you know, they may value those things differently. And I guess the point of all that is just to say that like having a deeper understanding of what your goals are beyond just like, oh, I want to do this competition. I'm trying to break this record or qualify for that meet. You know, having a goal that's beyond that, something that's deeper and more intrinsically related. I see the value in that.
Yeah. Well, it's like all these things exist on a dichotomy. Your internal motivation and your external motivation, they exist in different ways. And one of the perspectives that I've come to appreciate is whenever we have something in a dichotomy like that with external motivation and internal motivation, anytime if all our drivers are external motivation, it's going to make for a bad time. Your entire mood and the way you experience everything is going to be driven entirely off of the external validation if it's all external motivation. It doesn't mean external motivation is bad. It just means that we have to have points and places across that entire spectrum. We have to have both internal and external motivation. Neither one of them are bad unless it's, I don't want to say unbalanced, because I also look at it as everybody's balance point is going to be different. You know, it's more like like a seesaw has a balance point in the middle. However, depending on the two people on the seesaw will dictate like how it plays out, right?
My wife likes the term harmony.
There you go.
I think that gives me a good mental
Right.
image.
So like if you and I are going to play on a seesaw and we want to actually have fun with the way obviously the pivot point is going to need to be skewed a little bit more towards your side than my side so that we can have some harmony in our play together. But that's the
So
point with it, is knowing that and how that exists within yourself. And that's something that needs to be cultivated and connected with and awareness brought to it. And that's part of, like I say, the way I train is like, I need to bring awareness to those things and what drives me in a healthy and sustainable way so that I have that harmony with my life, with my training.
yeah. So you're putting on an event soon where you're going to be talking about this
Yep.
process and going into a lot of detail, teaching a considerable.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about what that's all?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So it was, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but after our return back from Africa, Vanessa and I were out on a mountain bike ride, and like the ideas just started coming to us about all this different stuff. And it, I look at it, it took the totality of all those experiences to be able to get to the point to have the vision for this thing. And so we're calling it the intentional athlete. And the point of it is to bring these tools to an event, a curated event that we're going to host at our house. We have some Airbnb space, so it's going to be like an all-inclusive event. You would stay here with us. We'll feed you. We have events scheduled throughout the day where we go through different things that teach people how to do this and cultivate and create it for themselves. Training with intention, and we'll have like intentional training sessions. What does that look like in the session? And then we'll have some lectures and presentations on intentional training tools. What does the intentionality look like before the session or after the session? We've talked a lot about why. Why do you lift? Why do you train? Well, I want to talk about that. Like, how do you cultivate that why? What is it? What does the process of creating and connecting that actually look like? What do we do with it? And because I think a lot of times we just arrive at, well, this is why I train. And we say why we train, but we don't necessarily talk about how do you arrive at that answer. And so we're going to talk about that. Like, we got our bonfire area that we'll have community conversations with that night, like cultivating your why, and light a fire and hang out and talk and figure out, like, what do we do? How do we do that? How do we cultivate that why? So I'm really excited about the possibilities of that and what that can do and help people. And I love the idea of, again, like, it's a seminar, an all-inclusive seminar, but we're going to get into the weeds on, like, what are you doing outside of the programming, the execution of the training? Like, I'm not even going to talk about emerging strategies or sets or reps at all. I want to get into the weeds on our mental engagement with the training, what we're doing from our mindset. How are we using that to create action? How are we using that to enhance our training? How are we using our training to enhance our life? How are we using our life to enhance our training? Like, I thought about it the other day. I don't remember, outside of a meet, when the last time was that I missed a rep. Like, and what I mean by missed a rep is like failed a rep. There's times where I've skipped a rep, where if I'm doing like a set of 10 to a 9 and I'm like, that last rep's probably not going, and I'll just rack it. Like, being aware of our training on that level, and that, like, different people have different mindsets on that. Like, oh no, go for it and fail and miss anyway. But I am, of the influence of Matt Gary on that. It's like, no lifter benefits from a missed lift. You ingrain poor neural pattern behaviors. You likely, in that regard, if you don't have an AMRAP written into your training, you're likely causing more stress than what you're supposed to, which is going to increase your recovery time for your next session and have impacts that way. So I think about it like that. It's about cultivating that kind of level of awareness. Do you know where your by 1 at 8 is going to be based on your last warm up? How accurate are you able to discern that? Now, we're going to have some times where we might read it a little bit wrong, but most of the time it should be pretty damn accurate. You ought to be aware enough to be able to do that.
Especially that, you're creating some space for people to think and work on those sorts of topics. We talk about this stuff a lot, and the mental side of training is a topic that comes up in, gosh, all lifting conversations ever since I was a young pup in this. But it's rare, it's difficult to talk about, like, intentional things that you can do. Like, you can talk about ways to bring up weak triceps or to fix your bar path, or you can talk about all that stuff. We spend a considerable amount of time on it, as well we should. Like, that's useful stuff as well. There's this whole other area of training that makes a tremendous difference. Like we spent this whole conversation talking about how it's like this decision-making tightrope that you walk in, not just like the couple weeks, but like the months, and it's probably not exaggeration to say years leading up to this, that was a major goal that you had thought about for a long time. And how do you then let the achievement of one goal facilitate and not detract from the achievement of your next
Yeah.
goal? And like that stuff is vitally important to the actual accomplishing of the thing that you're trying to accomplish, but it's difficult to get to the practical, so I think, spending some time doing that stuff intentionally has got to be time well spent. I mean, I'm excited for you. I hope that I can participate in this in some way. But yeah, how do people find out more information about this and potentially sign up?
Yeah, they can just reach out to me directly, and I will send them the link to the page with all the information and sign up an enrollment. That'd probably be the easiest way.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, and I mean, it shouldn't be too difficult to find online on Instagram, and kind of connected through anywhere that you can reach out and touch reactive training systems as well.
And I suppose if you have Instagram, because this is obviously in a lot of other places where people might not have Instagram, that's fine.
Sure.
You can just email me, ross@reactivetrainingsystems.com.
Yeah, that works. Awesome. Well, man, I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your perspectives on this. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Congratulations on a world
Yeah,
championship.
thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. You've definitely played a significant role in all of it. So I appreciate all your fellowship and support and leadership along the way.
Thanks. And thanks all of you for watching and listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. That feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.